Colorado Territory, December 1875. The mining town of Silver Creek glittered with frost under the weak winter sun, its wooden buildings and snow-dusted streets a stark contrast to the towering Rocky Mountains that surrounded it. Winter had come early this year, bringing with it the promise of a white Christmas and the annual holiday celebrations that even the rugged frontier couldn't diminish. Roy Zimmerman adjusted his Stetson as he guided his chestnut mare down the main street. At 25, he had already spent 7 years working cattle, his youthful face weathered slightly by sun and wind, but still handsome with clear blue eyes that matched the Colorado sky. His light stubble was the most beard he'd ever managed to grow, much to the amusement of the older cowboys who rode with him. Silver Creek wasn't his usual stomping ground. The Bar Z ranch where he worked lay 30 miles south, but the approaching holidays had brought him to town for supplies and perhaps a brief respite from the isolation of ranch life. Winter on the frontier meant long, lonely nights with nothing but howling wind and distant wolf calls for company. No place for settling down, Roy muttered to himself as he dismounted and tied his horse to the hitching post outside the general store. It was the mantra he'd adopted after watching too many good men broken by the harsh realities of frontier life. Marriage and family were luxuries few cowboys could afford, especially those without land of their own. Better to remain unattached, free to follow the work without dragging loved ones through hardship. The bell above the door jangled as Roy stepped into Wilcox's general store. The warmth inside was a welcome change from the biting December air, and the place was bustling with activity as townsfolk prepared for Christmas just 2 weeks away. Roy Zimmerman. "Haven't seen you in these parts for months," called Samuel Wilcox from behind the counter. The older man's beard was more gray than brown now, but his eyes still held the same shrewd sparkle. "Work keeps me busy, Mr. Wilcox," Roy replied, removing his hat. "Need to stock up before the next storm hits." As Roy handed over his supply list, the store's door opened again, bringing with it a swirl of snowflakes and a young woman Roy had never seen before. She was breathtaking, 19 or 20 at most, with rich chestnut hair peeking out from beneath a modest bonnet. Her green dress was practical but well-made, its emerald color bringing out the gold flecks in her hazel eyes. She moved with purpose, clearly familiar with the store's layout despite being a newcomer to Roy's knowledge. "Ah, Miss Zara, right on time," Samuel greeted her warmly. "I've got those books you ordered." "Thank you, Mr. Wilcox," she answered, her voice carrying a slight Eastern lilt. "My students will be thrilled." Students, Roy realized she must be the new schoolteacher he'd heard mentioned at the ranch. Silver Creek had been without one since spring when the previous teacher had married a miner and moved to Denver. Samuel turned back to Roy. "Have you met Miss Zara Wilson? Came all the way from Boston to teach our youngsters." "Miss Wilson, this is Roy Zimmerman, one of the best hands from the Bar Z." Roy found himself straightening his posture as he extended his hand. "Pleasure to meet you, Miss Wilson." "Likewise, Mr. Zimmerman." Her handshake was firm but brief, her smile polite but reserved. Roy had the distinct impression she was assessing him, those intelligent hazel eyes taking his measure. "Miss Wilson has brought proper education to our little town," Samuel continued. "The children adore her." "I simply try to give them the tools they need to build their futures," she replied modestly. "The West may be wild, but it needn't be ignorant." Roy found himself charmed by her directness. "Brave of you to come so far from Boston. Most Easterners I've met think we're all savages out here." A flicker of something pain, perhaps, crossed her features before she composed herself. "I find frontier honesty refreshing after Boston pretensions, Mr. Zimmerman. People here may be rough, but they're genuine." Their conversation was interrupted as other customers entered the store, bringing with them excited chatter about the upcoming Christmas social. Samuel's wife Martha was supervising a group of women hanging decorations, including a large bunch of mistletoe near the store's entrance. "Perfect spot," Martha declared. "We'll catch all the young couples as they come in." Roy noticed Miss Wilson's expression change instantly. Her body tensed and she stepped back, putting more distance between herself and the festive plant. It wasn't just discomfort, it was fear, unmistakable and visceral. "If you'll excuse me," she said abruptly to Roy and Samuel, "I should get these books back to the schoolhouse." She hastily gathered her purchases, careful to take a path that kept her well away from the doorway where Martha was arranging the mistletoe. As she rushed out, she nearly collided with Martha. "Oh, Miss Wilson, will you be helping with the Christmas decorations at the social hall tomorrow?" I'm not certain my schedule will permit it," she stammered, clearly uncomfortable. "But you must come to the social next week," Martha insisted. "Everyone will be there, we'll have music and dancing and of course plenty of mistletoe for the young folks." She winked at Roy, who felt his ears redden. Miss Wilson blanched. "Thank you for the invitation, good day." Without further comment, she hurried out into the snow. Roy found himself staring after her, puzzled by her reaction. Most young women he knew either giggled at mistletoe traditions or primly avoided them with a blush, but none reacted with such unmistakable fear. "Strange girl," commented Martha, returning to her decorating. "Brilliant teacher by all accounts, but peculiar sometimes, jumpy as a spring colt." Roy gathered his supplies, but his thoughts remained on Miss Wilson's reaction. Perhaps it was nothing, just a proper Eastern lady uncomfortable with frontier flirtations. But something in her eyes had spoken of deeper wounds. The frontier's no place for romance, Roy reminded himself as he loaded his supplies onto his horse. Yet as he rode back toward the Bar Z, the image of those haunted hazel eyes stayed with him, stirring something protective he'd long tried to bury. 3 days later, Roy found himself back in Silver Creek. The official reason was to mail letters for the ranch owner, but he couldn't deny a certain schoolteacher had influenced his volunteering for the task. The schoolhouse sat at the edge of town, a simple clapboard building with smoke curling from its chimney. Classes would be ending soon, judging by the position of the sun. Roy hesitated, uncertain what excuse he might offer for his presence. Fortune favored him when he noticed the woodpile beside the schoolhouse was running low. By the time the school bell rang and children began pouring out into the snowy yard, Roy had split enough wood to last a week. He leaned on the axe, catching his breath as the students called out cheerful goodbyes to their teacher. Zara Wilson appeared in the doorway, waving to her departing students. She wore a blue dress today, her chestnut hair pulled back in a practical but becoming style. She noticed Roy immediately, surprise evident on her face. "Mr. Zimmerman, is something wrong?" "No, ma'am," he said, suddenly feeling foolish. "Was in town on business and noticed your woodpile getting low. Thought I might help out." She approached cautiously, eyeing the newly split wood. "That's very kind of you, though I usually have one of the older boys handle it." "No trouble. Keeps the blood flowing in this cold." He set the axe aside. "How are you finding Silver Creek, Miss Wilson?" "It's certainly different from Boston," she said with a small smile. "But the children are eager to learn and the people have been welcoming." "Most of them anyway," came a sneering voice from behind Roy. He turned to find 3 men approaching, led by Everett Walsh, son of the town's richest mine owner. At 30, Walsh had inherited his father's business but none of his work ethic. His companions were cut from the same cloth, well-dressed but hard-eyed. "Afternoon, Miss Wilson," Walsh said, removing his expensive hat with exaggerated courtesy. "I was hoping to escort you to dinner this evening." Roy didn't miss how Zara's posture stiffened. "Thank you, Mr. Walsh, but I have papers to grade." Walsh's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Always working. All work makes for a dull life, Miss Wilson. Perhaps you need someone to show you how to enjoy the frontier." "I'm quite content with my routines," she replied firmly. Walsh stepped closer, ignoring Roy's presence. "Come now, a pretty woman like you shouldn't eat alone, I insist." "The lady declined," Roy interjected, straightening to his full height. Though not exceptionally tall, years of ranch work had hardened him, and he knew he could handle himself if needed. Walsh's attention shifted to Roy, eyes narrowing. "This doesn't concern you, Cowboy. Miss Wilson and I were having a private conversation." "Seems to me the conversation is over." Roy kept his tone even, but there was steel beneath it. For a moment, Tension crackled between them like static before a lightning strike. Then Walsh smirked and stepped back. "Another time, perhaps, Miss Wilson, when you're not occupied with ranch hands." The insult was clear in his tone as he and his companions departed. Roy turned back to find Zara pale but composed. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Has he been bothering you often?" Roy asked, concerned. She hesitated. "Mr. Walsh believes his father's position entitles him to whatever, and whomever, he wants. I've made it clear I'm not interested, but he's persistent." Roy frowned. "You should tell Sheriff Miller." "And say what?" "That a prominent citizen invited me to dinner too forcefully." She shook her head. "I can handle Everett Walsh." "Well, if you need help handling him, I'm usually not far," Roy offered. Her expression softened. "That's kind of you, Mr. Zimmerman. Would you like to come in for coffee? It's the least I can offer after all this wood splitting." The schoolhouse was warm and smelled of chalk dust and books. One wall was covered with children's drawings depicting frontier life, some alarmingly accurate in their depiction of hardships. Zara busied herself with the small stove in the corner while Roy removed his hat, feeling strangely nervous. "Sugar?" she asked, handing him a steaming cup. "No, thank you, black is fine." He took a careful sip. "This is good. Real coffee's hard to come by on the ranch. I brought several pounds with me from Boston. I've discovered I can face almost anything with sufficient coffee." Her smile was warm but didn't quite reach her eyes. "Including Christmas socials with Mistletoe," the words slipped out before he could stop them. The cup in her hand trembled slightly. "I beg your pardon." Roy wished he could retract the question, but it was too late. "I noticed at the store, you seemed uncomfortable when Mrs. Wilcox mentioned the mistletoe decorations." Zara set her cup down carefully, her expression closing like a book. "You're very observant, Mr. Zimmerman." "Occupational hazard. When you work with cattle, you learn to notice small changes in behavior." "I wasn't aware I was being compared to livestock," she said coolly. Roy winced. "That's not what I meant." "I apologize if I overstepped." She sighed, the defensiveness leaving her posture. "No, I'm sorry, that was unfair." She was quiet for a moment, seemingly debating with herself. "I simply don't care for certain holiday traditions. They remind me of things I'd rather forget." Roy sensed there was much more to the story, but he wouldn't press. Everyone on the frontier carried secrets and scars. He certainly had his own. "I understand," he said simply. "Some memories are best left undisturbed." She studied him for a moment, then nodded gratefully. "Yes, they are." They finished their coffee in companionable silence. As Roy prepared to leave, Zara walked him to the door. "Will you be at the Christmas social?" she asked suddenly. "Hadn't planned on it." "Dancing's not my strong suit." "Nor mine," she admitted, "but I'm told attendance is practically mandatory for new residents." She hesitated. "It might be easier to face if I knew someone there." "Someone who doesn't ask uncomfortable questions." Roy felt an unexpected warmth spread through him. "I reckon I could manage to attend." "Thank you," her relief was palpable. "And thank you for the wood." As Roy rode back to the Bar Z, he couldn't deny the lightness in his chest. It was dangerous territory. He'd seen too many cowboys lose themselves over pretty faces, only to end up broken when frontier realities intruded. Yet something about Zara Wilson's quiet strength called to him. She carried wounds, that much was clear, but she faced the frontier with determination regardless. "Just being neighborly," he told himself firmly. But even his horse seemed to snort in disbelief. The Christmas social arrived with a fresh snowfall that transformed Silver Creek into a scene from a storybook. The social hall, normally used for town meetings and church services when the traveling preacher visited, had been festooned with pine boughs, red ribbons, and paper decorations made by the schoolchildren. Roy arrived early, uncharacteristically nervous in his best shirt and freshly polished boots. He'd even splurged on a haircut at the barber shop, earning knowing looks from the other ranch hands. He spotted Zara the moment she entered. She wore a dress of deep burgundy, more festive than her usual attire but still modest. Her chestnut hair was arranged in soft curls that framed her face, and for a moment, Roy forgot to breathe. She noticed him immediately, relief evident in her expression as she made her way through the crowded hall toward him. Several people greeted her as she passed, evidence that she'd been accepted by the community despite her Eastern origins. "You came," she said simply when she reached him. "Said I would." He found himself smiling. "You look lovely, Miss Wilson." A blush colored her cheeks. "Thank you, and please call me Zara, we needn't stand on formality." "Zara," he repeated, liking how it sounded. "Then I'm Roy." The evening progressed pleasantly. Though neither danced much, they enjoyed the music and conversation. Roy introduced Zara to several ranchers and their wives, while she helped him navigate the social expectations he usually avoided. They made a good team, he realized, each filling in the other's gaps. Trouble arrived in the form of Everett Walsh, who'd clearly been drinking before the social even began. He approached as Roy was fetching punch for Zara. "Our Boston schoolmarm seems to have lowered her standards," Walsh commented loudly enough for nearby conversations to falter. "First she refuses a mine owner, then shows up with a cow puncher." Roy set the punch cups down carefully. "Evening, Walsh, enjoying the festivities." "I'd enjoy them more if certain people remembered their place," Walsh replied, his words slightly slurred. "Educated women like Miss Wilson belong with men of standing, not saddle tramps." Roy felt anger rise but kept his voice even. "Miss Wilson makes her own choices about her company." "Does she?" Walsh's eyes narrowed. "Or is she simply naive about Western ways? Perhaps someone should educate her on the realities of frontier life." The threat was thinly veiled. Roy stepped closer. "I think you've had enough celebration for one night." Sheriff Miller appeared beside them, his weathered face stern beneath his gray mustache. "Everything all right here, gentlemen?" Walsh forced a smile. "Just a friendly conversation, Sheriff." "Good, keep it that way." Miller wasn't fooled, but he knew interfering in Walsh business required careful handling. "Your father's looking for you, Everett. Something about an investor from Denver." Walsh shot Roy a final glare before departing, but the confrontation had soured the evening's mood. When Roy returned to Zara, her earlier ease had vanished. "Perhaps we should leave," she suggested quietly. "I've fulfilled my social obligation." Roy nodded, concerned by the worry in her eyes. "I'll walk you home." They retrieved their coats and headed for the door, only to be stopped by Martha Wilcox's excited voice. "Wait, you're under the mistletoe." Roy looked up to see the sprig of greenery hanging directly above them. Around them, several partygoers had noticed and were watching expectantly, including Everett Walsh from across the room. Zara froze, her face draining of color. Her breathing quickened, and Roy recognized the signs of panic. Without hesitation, he stepped away from her, breaking the mistletoe's spell. "Afraid we'll have to disappoint the tradition, Mrs. Wilcox," he said lightly. "Miss Wilson and I are just friends." Disappointment rippled through the onlookers, but Roy ignored them, guiding Zara outside with a protective hand at her elbow. Once they were clear of the hall, she drew a shuddering breath. "Thank you," she whispered, visibly trembling despite the warmth of her coat. "I'm sorry." "No need to apologize," he assured her. "Let's get you home." The walk to her small teacher's cottage was silent. Snow crunched beneath their boots and their breath fogged in the cold air. Roy kept a respectful distance, sensing she needed space. At her doorstep, Zara finally spoke. "You must think me ridiculous. A grown woman afraid of a harmless plant." "I don't think that at all," Roy said honestly. "We all have our reasons for the things we fear." She studied him for a long moment, as if making a decision. "Would you like to come in?" "Just for a few minutes. I think perhaps I should explain." Her cottage was small but neat, warmed by a small stove and illuminated by oil lamps. Books lined every available surface, clearly her most treasured possessions. She removed her coat and gloves, then gestured for Roy to sit while she prepared tea. When she returned, her composure had been restored, though she still seemed fragile. "What I'm about to tell you isn't something I share lightly. But you've been kind, and I don't want you to think I'm simply being frivolous." "You don't owe me any explanations," Roy said gently. "Perhaps not, but I'd like to give one anyway." She took a deep breath. 3 years ago in Boston, I was engaged to be married. Edward Harrington, from a good family, well-educated, charming. We met at a Christmas party under mistletoe, actually. Her smile was bitter. It seemed romantic at the time. Roy remained silent, sensing the story would grow darker. We were to be married in spring, but as the wedding approached, Edward changed. He became possessive, controlling. When I expressed opinions he disagreed with, he would berate me, tell me I was being hysterical or foolish. She stared into her tea. I began to see a side of him his social charm had hidden. Roy felt anger stirring on her behalf. "Did he hurt you?" "Not physically at first, but words can wound deeply too." She took another steadying breath. "One night at his family's Christmas gathering, we found ourselves beneath mistletoe again. I was already planning to break our engagement, but hadn't found the courage yet. When I hesitated to kiss him, he became angry." Her hands trembled slightly around her cup. "Afterward he followed me home, accused me of embarrassing him. When I tried to end our engagement then and there, she faltered. "He became violent, said if I wouldn't be his wife, I'd be nothing at all." Roy's hands tightened into fists, but he kept his voice gentle. "What happened?" "My father intervened. There was a struggle. Edward fell and struck his head." Her eyes closed briefly. "He survived, but the scandal was enormous. His family had influence, connections. They made sure everyone in Boston society knew I was to blame. A hysterical woman who'd driven a good man to violence." "That's not fair," Roy protested. "Fairness is rare in this world I've found." Her smile was sad. "My teaching position was withdrawn. No respectable school in Boston would hire me after that. When I saw the advertisement for a teacher in Colorado Territory, it seemed like Providence, a place far enough away that Edward's family couldn't reach me." Roy understood now why she'd come so far, why she tensed at the sight of mistletoe. "I'm sorry that happened to you, Zara. No one should suffer that way." "I've made peace with most of it," she said quietly. "But mistletoe, it brings back that night the fear, the helplessness." "Foolish, I know." "Not foolish at all," Roy assured her. "The mind remembers what the heart can't forget." She looked at him with genuine appreciation. "Most men would tell me to simply overcome it. That it happened long ago, and I should move forward." "Most men haven't seen how deep some wounds can cut," Roy replied. "Out here we all carry scars. The ones that don't show often hurt the most." They talked late into the night, their conversation moving from painful pasts to hopes for the future. Roy found himself sharing things he rarely discussed: his childhood in Missouri, losing his parents to typhoid at 16, his journey west seeking something he couldn't name. "Do you ever regret coming to the frontier?" she asked as the hour grew late. He considered the question seriously. "Sometimes. It's a hard life, lonely often, but there's freedom here that doesn't exist back east. Room to breathe, to become whoever you choose." "Yes," she agreed softly. "That's what I've found too. Despite everything, I feel more myself here than I ever did in Boston." When Roy finally took his leave, something had shifted between them, a connection forged through shared vulnerability. At her door he hesitated. "I'll be back in town next Saturday if you'd like company for dinner. No mistletoe, I promise." Her smile was the most genuine he'd seen. "I'd like that very much." Through the remainder of December, Roy found reasons to visit Silver Creek with increasing frequency. He repaired the schoolhouse roof, built new shelves for Zara's growing book collection, and once brought a gentle mare for her to ride on a crisp winter afternoon. Each visit deepened their connection, a slow-building trust neither had expected to find. The townsfolk noticed, of course. Gossip spread that the Boston schoolteacher and the Bar Z cowboy were courting, though neither Roy nor Zara put such labels on their friendship. Both had been wounded by life, both approached connection with caution. Everett Walsh noticed too, his resentment growing with each of Roy's visits. His pride couldn't accept that Zara preferred a cowboy's company to his own, and he began spreading insinuations about her past, questioning what had really driven her from Boston. Probably ran from scandal. he suggested loudly in the Silver Creek saloon one evening. "Those Eastern ladies often have secrets beneath their proper manners." Roy, entering to deliver a message, overheard the comment. "Careful, Walsh. Your jealousy is showing." Walsh turned, a cruel smile on his face. "Jealousy of what? A woman with a questionable past and a cowboy who will never own more than his saddle. You're welcome to her, Zimmerman. I'm simply concerned for our town's children, being taught by someone who fled Boston under mysterious circumstances." Roy's fists clenched. "There's nothing mysterious about seeking a fresh start. Something you'd understand if you'd ever worked for anything in your life, instead of riding your father's coattails." The saloon fell silent, men shifting away from the confrontation brewing. Walsh's face darkened with anger, but before he could respond, the saloon doors opened to admit Sheriff Miller. "Problem here, gentlemen?" the lawman asked mildly, though his hand rested near his pistol. "Just a difference of opinion, Sheriff," Roy answered, not taking his eyes off Walsh. "I was just leaving." Outside, Roy leaned against the hitching post, trying to calm his temper. Walsh's insinuations worried him, not because he believed them, but because he knew how quickly frontier towns could turn on outsiders when rumors began. His concern grew over the following weeks as Walsh's campaign against Zara intensified. Questions arose about her teaching methods, her Eastern ideas, and increasingly, about what had really brought her west. Roy noticed some parents regarding her with new suspicion when they collected their children. "You should tell them the truth," Roy suggested one evening as they sat on the porch of her cottage. "Get ahead of Walsh's rumors." Zara sighed. "And confirm I was involved in a scandal. That wouldn't help Roy. Frontier communities can be as judgmental as Boston drawing rooms, just in different ways. Not if they knew the real story, that you were the victim, not the cause." Perhaps she didn't sound convinced. "I just wanted to leave it all behind me." Roy understood her reluctance. The frontier offered second chances precisely because people didn't ask too many questions about the past. But that same quality made rumors dangerous. In the absence of truth, people believed the worst. Christmas Eve arrived with a heavy snowfall that blanketed Silver Creek in pristine white. Despite the weather, the town's Christmas Eve service was well attended, the small church filled with miners, ranchers, and townsfolk gathered to celebrate. Roy sat beside Zara near the back, conscious of the glances they attracted. Most were friendly, Mrs. Wilcox even winked at them, but others held speculation, or, in the case of Everett Walsh and his friends, outright hostility. After the service, people lingered to exchange Christmas wishes. Roy watched Zara interact with her students and their parents, her natural warmth evident despite the reserve she maintained with adults. She loved teaching, that much was clear, and the children adored her. "Miss Wilson," called Mrs. Peterson, mother of two of Zara's students, "will you join us for Christmas dinner tomorrow?" "We'd be honored to have you." Before Zara could respond, Everett Walsh approached, his father, a stern, silver-haired man with cold eyes, beside him. "Actually, Miss Wilson might be otherwise engaged tomorrow," Walsh said smoothly. "Father has some questions about her qualifications and background. As head of the town council, he's concerned about certain rumors." Frederick Walsh nodded gravely. "Indeed. I've received some concerning correspondence from Boston regarding your departure, Miss Wilson. We should discuss it." Roy stepped forward. Christmas seems an odd time for such discussions. The elder Walsh regarded Roy with thinly veiled disdain. "This is town business, Mr. Zimmerman. It doesn't concern ranch hands." "It concerns me when you're questioning the character of a friend based on rumors your son started because she rejected him," Roy replied evenly. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the onlookers. Frederick Walsh's expression hardened. Serious allegations deserve serious investigation, regardless of who raised them. The school board will meet the day after Christmas to discuss Miss Wilson's continued employment. Zara had gone pale but stood straight. "I've done nothing to be ashamed of, Mr. Walsh. I welcome any fair review of my qualifications and character." "We shall see," the older man replied coldly before departing with his son, who shot Roy a triumphant glance. As the crowd dispersed, concerned whispers following the Walsh's announcement, Roy turned to Zara. What correspondence was he talking about? I don't know, she said, distress evident in her voice. But Edward's family had connections everywhere, if they discovered where I went. We'll fight this, Roy promised. The truth is on your side. She looked unconvinced. Truth doesn't always prevail, Roy. Not against wealth and influence. The walk back to her cottage was subdued, both lost in worried thoughts. At her door, Roy hesitated. Come to the Bar Z for Christmas dinner tomorrow. Get away from town and all this talk for a day. I can't run from this, she said tiredly. That's what I did in Boston and look where it's led. No, I need to face whatever's coming. Roy understood her determination, even as he worried for her. Then I'll be right beside you, whatever happens. Her expression softened. You shouldn't entangle yourself in my problems, Roy. The Walshes have influence over every business in this region, including the Bar Z. You could lose your position. Some things matter more than a job, he said simply. Before he could reconsider, he leaned forward and pressed a gentle kiss to her cheek. Merry Christmas, Zara. Her eyes widened in surprise, but she didn't pull away. Merry Christmas, Roy, she whispered. Christmas Day dawned clear and cold, the fresh snow glistening under bright sunshine. Roy arrived at Zara's cottage mid-morning, bearing a small gift wrapped in brown paper. His breath caught when she opened the door wearing a festive green dress, her hair arranged in soft waves around her face. You look beautiful, he said honestly. She blushed. Thank you, come in, I have coffee ready. Inside, she decorated her small home with pine boughs and red ribbons. A tiny tree stood in one corner, adorned with paper stars made by her students. It was modest but welcoming, like Zara herself. They exchanged gifts by the warmth of her stove. Roy had carved her a small wooden box with intricate wildflower designs, a skill he'd learned during long winter evenings on the ranch. Zara gave him a leather-bound journal and a fine fountain pen. For writing down your thoughts, she explained. You have a poet's soul behind that cowboy exterior. The day passed pleasantly despite the shadow of tomorrow's meeting hanging over them. They shared a simple Christmas dinner, then walked through the snow-covered town, greeting those they passed with holiday wishes. Even with uncertainty ahead, Roy couldn't remember a Christmas he'd enjoyed more. As evening approached, they returned to Zara's cottage. Standing on her porch, Roy found himself reluctant to leave. Whatever happens tomorrow, he said, taking her hands in his, know that I believe in you. We'll face it together. Tears shimmered in her eyes. Why are you doing this, Roy? Risking your reputation, maybe even your job, for someone you've known barely a month? He considered the question seriously. Because in that month I've seen your courage, your kindness, your strength. Because you face each day on this harsh frontier without flinching, despite everything you've been through. He paused, gathering his courage. And because I think I'm falling in love with you, Zara Wilson. She inhaled sharply, her eyes searching his face for any sign of insincerity. Finding none, she stepped closer. I've been afraid to admit it, even to myself. Love hasn't brought me happiness before. I can't promise it will be easy, Roy said honestly. The frontier isn't kind to dreams. But I promise to stand beside you, through whatever comes. In answer, she rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his, a kiss as gentle as falling snow but filled with promise. When they parted, both were smiling despite the challenges ahead. Until tomorrow, then, she whispered. The town hall was packed the following morning, curious townspeople crowding in to witness the special school board meeting. Roy sat directly behind Zara in the front row, where she faced Frederick Walsh and 4 other board members at a long table. Everett Walsh sat smugly beside his father, occasionally sending triumphant glances toward Roy. The elder Walsh called the meeting to order with solemn formality. We are gathered to address concerns regarding Miss Wilson's suitability as our schoolteacher, he began. I have received correspondence from Boston questioning both her qualifications and her character. He produced a letter bearing an elaborate letterhead. This comes from the Harrington family, highly respected in Boston society. It states that Miss Wilson was dismissed from her previous position following a scandal involving their son, to whom she was briefly engaged. According to this account, Miss Wilson displayed unstable behavior and violent tendencies that resulted in serious injury to Edward Harrington. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Zara sat perfectly still, her back straight, though Roy could see the tension in her shoulders. "What do you say to these accusations, Miss Wilson?" Walsh demanded. Zara stood, her voice steady despite her pallor. "I was indeed engaged to Edward Harrington. I ended that engagement when I discovered his true nature, controlling, manipulative, and ultimately violent." She took a deep breath. "The injury he sustained occurred when he attacked me in my father's home after I refused to continue our relationship. My father intervened to protect me, and in the struggle, Mr. Harrington fell and struck his head. Convenient that your father is thousands of miles away and cannot verify this version of events," Everett Walsh interjected. "My father passed away last year," Zara said quietly. "But there were witnesses to Edward's behavior leading up to that night. Other teachers, friends who saw the bruises he left. None of whom are here," Frederick Walsh pointed out. "We have only your word against a respected Boston family." "And the quality of her work here," Roy spoke up from his seat. "Has any parent complained about Miss Wilson's teaching? Have the children failed to learn under her guidance?" Several parents in the crowd called out in support of Zara, praising her dedication and their children's progress. Walsh frowned at the interruption. "The issue is not her teaching ability but her character," he insisted. "We cannot have someone of questionable moral standing influencing our children." "There is nothing questionable about defending oneself against violence," Roy countered, rising to stand beside Zara. "Miss Wilson came west seeking safety and a fresh start, not to escape punishment for any wrongdoing." "Mr. Zimmerman, you are not a board member," Walsh said coldly. "Your input is neither requested nor relevant." "I disagree," came a new voice from the back of the hall. The crowd parted to reveal Sheriff Miller making his way forward. In his hand, he held a telegram. "This arrived this morning from Boston, addressed to me as head of law enforcement." He approached the table and handed the paper to Walsh, who read it with increasing discomfort. "Would you share the contents with the board, Mr. Walsh?" Miller prompted when the man remained silent. Walsh cleared his throat. "It's a statement from the Boston Police Department, confirming that Edward Harrington was investigated for assaults on 2 women prior to his engagement to Miss Wilson. The charges were dropped after financial arrangements with the families." His voice grew strained. "It further states that following the incident with Miss Wilson, Mr. Harrington was briefly committed to a private sanitarium for treatment of violent tendencies." A hush fell over the room. The sheriff nodded. "I took the liberty of sending inquiries after yesterday's conversation at the church. Seems the Harrington family's respectability has some significant blemishes." "This doesn't prove Miss Wilson's account," Everett Walsh protested, though with less conviction. "Perhaps this will help," said Martha Wilcox, rising from her seat. "Before hiring Miss Wilson, I wrote to her previous headmistress in Boston, an old school friend of mine. She confirmed that Miss Wilson was an exemplary teacher, whose only fault was refusing to marry a man from an influential family." She fixed Frederick Walsh with a stern look. "Some of us did our due diligence before jumping to conclusions based on malicious gossip." Frederick Walsh's expression soured as he realized the tide of public opinion was turning. He conferred briefly with the other board members before addressing the room again. "In light of this additional information, the board finds no cause to question Miss Wilson's position or character. This meeting is adjourned." The crowd erupted in conversation as people began to disperse. Zara remained seated, visibly shaken by the ordeal. Roy knelt beside her chair. "It's over," he said gently. "They believe you now." "Thanks to you and Sheriff Miller," she whispered. "If you hadn't questioned the Walsh's accusations." "I just gave Miller a reason to dig deeper. He did the real work." Roy took her hand. "Are you all right?" Before she could answer, Everett Walsh approached, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "This isn't over, Zimmerman. Father may have backed down for now, but we still own half this county. You've made powerful enemies today." Roy stood to face him. "Seems to me you did that yourself, spreading lies about a woman whose only crime was preferring honest company to yours." Walsh's hand moved toward his coat, where Roy knew he carried a small pistol. Sheriff Miller stepped between them. "That's enough, Everett. Go home, cool off. Remember that threatening folks is against the law, no matter who your daddy is." With a final glare, Walsh stalked away. The sheriff turned to Zara with a sympathetic nod. "Sorry you had to go through that, Miss Wilson. For what it's worth, this town's lucky to have you." As people filtered out, many stopped to express similar sentiments to Zara. The support seemed to restore her spirits, and by the time they left the hall, some color had returned to her cheeks. "What now?" Roy asked as they walked through town. Snow was beginning to fall again, soft flakes catching in Zara's hair. "Now I continue teaching," she said with determination, "and living my life without fear of the past catching up to me." She looked at him earnestly. "What you said yesterday about falling in love. Did you mean it?" "Every word," Roy confirmed. "Though I know it complicates things, I'm just a cowboy, Zara. I can't offer you much." She stopped walking, turning to face him fully. "You offered me truth when others believed lies. You stood beside me when it might have cost you everything. That's worth more than gold or property." Her eyes shone with emotion. "I think I'm falling in love with you too, Roy Zimmerman." He drew her close, uncaring of who might see. "Then we'll figure out the rest together." Their kiss there in the gently falling snow felt like a promise of healing, of hope, of a future neither had dared imagine before. The weeks following the school board meeting brought significant changes to Silver Creek. Frederick Walsh, embarrassed by his son's behavior and the public revelation of their error, retreated from town affairs. Everett was sent to oversee mining interests in Denver, removing his disruptive presence from the community. For Roy and Zara, winter passed in a sweet haze of deepening affection. He visited whenever ranch work permitted, helping with repairs around the schoolhouse, attending community events at her side, and spending quiet evenings by her fire discussing books, dreams, and the future. By early March, Roy had made a decision. The Bar Z's owner, seeing Roy's reliability and skill, had offered him the position of foreman with a significant increase in pay. More importantly, the position came with use of a small cabin on the ranch's northern boundary, a place Roy could call his own. On the first truly warm Saturday of spring, Roy took Zara riding to see the cabin. Wildflowers had begun to dot the prairie, painting the landscape with splashes of color after winter's monochrome palette. "It's not much," Roy said as they approached the simple log structure. "2 rooms need some work on the roof. But the creek runs year-round, and there's good grazing land." Zara dismounted, taking in the cabin and the sweeping view of mountains beyond. "It's beautiful, Roy." Inside was basic but sound. A stone fireplace, sturdy walls, windows that needed new glass but framed spectacular views. Roy watched nervously as Zara explored the space, trying to see it through her eyes. "The school term ends in May," she said suddenly, running her hand along the rough-hewn mantel. "I haven't decided yet whether to renew my contract." Roy's heart sank. "Are you thinking of returning east?" She turned to him, a soft smile on her lips. "I'm thinking I might prefer a shorter commute to the schoolhouse. If I lived here, it would be nearly 10 miles each way." Hope bloomed in his chest. "Zara, are you saying?" "I'm saying that I love you, Roy Zimmerman. I love the life we could build here if you wanted that too." In 3 strides, he crossed the room and took her hands in his. "I want that more than anything, but I need to do this properly." He lowered himself to one knee, still holding her hands. "Zara Wilson, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? I can't offer wealth or luxury, but I promise to stand by you through whatever life brings, to respect your independence and support your dreams, and to love you faithfully for all our days." Tears spilled down Zara's cheeks as she nodded. "Yes, Roy, yes, I will marry you." Their wedding took place in May, after the school term ended. The entire town turned out for the celebration, the same social hall where they'd first connected now decorated with spring flowers and ribbons. Sheriff Miller gave the bride away, and Martha Wilcox organized a feast that would be talked about for years to come. When it came time for the traditional first dance, Roy led Zara to the center of the floor with confidence he'd never possessed before meeting her. "You've been practicing," she whispered as he guided her smoothly through the steps. "Might have had some lessons from Mrs. Patterson," he admitted with a grin. "Wanted to do right by my bride." As they danced, Roy noticed something hanging from the rafters above, a sprig of greenery that seemed out of place in spring. "Is that," Zara began, following his gaze. "Mistletoe," he confirmed, watching her carefully for signs of distress, but instead of fear her eyes held only thoughtful consideration. "You know it's just a plant." "It was never the mistletoe I feared, but what happened beneath it." She met his eyes steadily. "Perhaps it's time to create new memories." Roy's heart swelled with pride at her courage. "Are you sure?" In answer she stepped closer, rising on tiptoe to press her lips to his in a kiss that promised healing, hope, and a lifetime of love. The crowd around them cheered, but Roy barely heard them, lost in the miracle of the woman in his arms. Later that night, as they stood on the porch of their cabin, their home, watching stars appear in the vast western sky, Roy wrapped his arms around his wife from behind. "Happy?" he asked softly. Zara leaned back against him, secure in his embrace. "More than I ever thought possible." She turned in his arms to face him. "You know, when I came west, I was running from the past. I never expected to find a future so full of promise. The frontier gives second chances to those brave enough to take them," Roy said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "And you, Zara Zimmerman, are the bravest person I know." Their kiss beneath the starlit sky sealed a promise that had begun beneath mistletoe, not of fear, but of love that had found its way home on the wild frontier.